Video 2 is about pricing. One of the questions that's coming up is, are prices going to continue going up too fast? You know, we're seeing appreciation at a level that's having many asking and concerned. Can we sustain this in the market? So I just want to talk to you about that for a quick minute and give you some data and insight. It's going to help you in making your own decisions for your household, as well as helping you decipher the if it bleeds, it leads scenario in the news and the headlines. Okay, this first slide, we're going to be looking at Craig Lazara. It comes out of the Case-Shiller report that most recently was published. He says housing prices were notably, and I'm tempted to say very strong in September. The National Composite Index gained 7% relative to its level a year ago. This is 7% appreciation that he's talking about. Our 3-month readings since June of this year have all shown accelerating growth in home prices, and September's results are quite strong. So people are asking, is this something I need to be worried about? What's going on with home prices, and can we sustain this type of appreciation? Now, I want to give you a little bit of perspective here, okay? In our next slide, let's look back. If we look at compound annual home price appreciation going all the way back to 1991, we see that the average is 3.8% in annual home price appreciation. If we look back at 2012, we see that's been considerably higher, 6.1% appreciation. So when you look at the average going back to 91 of 3.8% and we look at 7%, that's quite a jump. Okay, so now let's look at this next slide. The research team at Keeping Current Matters went back and looked at 2000, and they looked at the historical appreciation of 3.8% and said, hey, well, what would happen to home values if it just played out at that 3.8%? And the housing crash didn't happen, and we just went through this normal market of 3.8% every year, okay? Obviously, that's not reality. I'm just trying to show you something. But they went ahead and then they laid in reality, or what actually occurred, okay? So this next slide, we're going to add the green bars of what actually happens in the market so that you can see this run up in prices in the early 2000s up until 2008 when the mortgage crash occurred. And remember that that's when they were making non-qualifying loans. That's what caused that crash. The actual sales prices drop, and then it takes a little while to really come back, okay? So now look at this next slide. This is the story of inventory and home prices and what has happened to both of those over the last 10 years. If you look at this graph, it shows that as the supply of homes on the market goes down, the orange line, the prices, the green line, have gone up. So we're seeing a limited supply across the country and home prices going up for a lot of different reasons, okay? Interest rates are fueling buyer demand right now. The different needs that people have had through the pandemic for housing are also fueling buyer demand. So many things are putting pressure, and that lack of supply is keeping upward pressure on prices, pushing them higher. So what you saw in the report previously when we were looking at the Craig Lazara quote of 7% higher year over year, that's how that happened. Next, we're going to take a look at the slide with Lawrence Yun. He's the NAR's chief economist. He says, such a frenzy of activity reminiscent of 2006 raises questions about a bubble and the potential for a painful crash. It's on a lot of people's minds. The answer, there's no comparison. Back in 2006, dubious adjustable rate mortgages taxed many buyers' budgets. Some loans didn't even require income documentation, and today buyers are taking out 30-year fixed rate mortgages versus the adjustable rate mortgages we saw in that era. Also, 14 years ago, there were 3.8 million homes listed for sale, and home builders were putting up about 2 million new units. Now, inventory is only at about 1.5 million homes total, and home builders are underproducing relative to historical averages. Next, we're going to take a look at this CNN headline, and I just want you guys to be aware when you see these. This is another headline that I think you're going to see relative to this era that we're moving into, and that's going to be about mortgage debt across the country, right now soaring to close to $10 trillion. That's obviously a big number, so people are going to say, okay, here we go again. Prices are appreciating at an unsustainable rate, mortgage debt is soaring. But I want you guys to have this information. So here's the Federal Reserve Bank slide. You know, if we look back at the Federal Reserve Bank, mortgage balances, the largest component of household debt, rose by $85 billion in the third quarter and sat at $9.86 trillion on September 30th. Mortgage originations, which include refinances, were at $1.05 trillion. So the second highest volume in the history of the series, the second only to the historic refinance boom of the third quarter of 2003. Okay? So as we start to see all of these refinances come in, we see volume coming in, we're seeing more mortgage debt. So now it's important to remember that mortgage debt is going to rise as more homes are built and as those homes appreciate and more homes are sold, okay? So that's the part you're not getting in those "if it bleeds, it leads" headlines. So all of this to say what you really want to look at is the debt service ratio, okay? Let's look at that. I've got a graph here provided by the Federal Reserve of household debt service ratio for mortgages as a percentage of disposable personal income. Look at the left and then look at the right side of this graph. If we look all the way back to 1980, the left side, you can see there where we stand today. The right side is lower than where we were in the 80s, 90s, and certainly in the early 2000s, when we peaked at over 7% during the housing bubble, okay? Today we sit at 3.72% of disposable income committed to a mortgage payment. That's low. Why is that? That is the effect of lower interest rates and rising wages. So this is something to give you a perspective as you start to see these bleed to lead headlines, okay? Ignore them. In our next video, we're going to look into 2021 and what it has in store.